Well, thanks very much. There is definitely an unstoppable march towards privacy destruction. Some of it we control, and some of it we don't. So I'd like to discuss that for the next few minutes, and perhaps leave you with the thought that thinking about privacy needs to change. The subject hasn't changed in many, many decades, and it might be time for it to change. Little disclaimer, I'm neither a lawyer or a privacy expert. I am a computer scientist, but I'm also a citizen, a person who cares deeply about my privacy and the privacy of others, my colleagues and friends and family. So this is a subject that's deeply personal, and also I think impacts every one of you in this room. So to understand the context, let's go back a bit, and I'll give you a little history of American privacy. Contrary to what many believe, privacy is not part of the original US Constitution. It doesn't cite it anywhere. The only reference to it is the census, which actually asks you for information. So it requires you to be unprivate as part of it. It's only until the Bill of Rights and the Fourth Amendment where we have some suggestion of search and seizure, and that's where we get the remaining, a lot of the influence with regard to privacy and privacy law in this country through federal, state, and local laws. Privacy, contrary to other countries in the world, very often relies on the self-governance of organizations like the American Medical Association or certified public accountants. So it's very much a self-governed. So let's think about the last 10 years. The onslaught and the destruction of privacy has been happening for decades, but it took on new meaning since 9/11, not just because of 9/11, but because of what's happened in the last 10 years. A lot has happened with the internet and with the web. So I'd like to point a few of those out to you. One of the first things you're probably all familiar with is the Patriot Act. It came into play 44 days after 9/11, and it was very, very far-reaching as it relates to privacy. Specifically around emails, it would allow a local district judge to be able to acquire emails, as well as allowing the surveillance of packet networks. That's a very, very broad part of technology, by the way. Later on in the decade, about 5 years, 6 years in, it was slightly modified, and some of it was wound down a little bit. And then even this year, parts of the Patriot Act still continue, but a much smaller subset of that. Many of you may remember Conover. Conover was an FBI piece of software that was installed and deployed back in the mid-90s and continued through 9/11 through into the mid part of the last decade. And it got, people began to understand it a bit more because the US Patriot Act was much more prevalent in our lives. And about the mid part, about 2005, the uproar was so great that the FBI decided to change the name to DCS because it sounded a little bit more benign. However, within a few months, they had to shut it down anyway because the uproar was too great about what it could do to actually look at your private emails. Subsequently, they're doing a lot more elaborate things, but that's beyond the scope of this talk. So in the last 10 years, one of the things we notice is there's a massive increase in the amount of monitoring and data collection we have on everything in our lives. Everything from the products we buy at the shopping center and the supply of products through the supply chain. At every point in our lives, a lot more data is being collected. When we use a web browser, many of the things we're doing are being recorded on that computer. And when you go back to a website, that website knows you've been there and can do different things. This has the beautiful name of cookies. One could say it's a little bit more sinister than that. But you can turn those off, but it's a real fact of life and not known to many people. In fact, the amount of surveillance done on what you're doing on the web when you surf it is way beyond what most people imagine. Here we see a heat map that shows where it's red, where people generally are keeping their mouse on this particular web page. And you could say, well, that's kind of scary. Well, there's a certain amount of scariness to it, but at the same time, perhaps the website will be better because the designers will be able to make decisions based on where you have your mouse. Through the last 10, everybody knows this, right? Through the last 10 years, people have really grown to make search engines part of their lives. And although you don't like it to hear it, every search is recorded. Every computer that makes that search is recorded. It's a vast amount of information, and it's being used. It's used in aggregate, we'll see that in a second, but it's also used for court cases. In this particular instance, this is the search term that was found on the computer of Casey Anthony's Holmes computer, and it was used as part of that trial. We're also, because of the sheer volume of the information we're storing online, it's more susceptible to breaches. During the last 10 years, since 9/11, there has been a lot of very high-profile breaches of your security. This particular stat here, over 3 years, 45 million credit card and debit cards were breached. If you shopped at TJ Maxx or Marshalls, right, somebody got hold of your credit card. Smartphones have grown over the last 10 years. In fact, over the last 4 or 5 years. And in this particular example that I'm going to share with you, it was discovered that there is a file on the iPhone that records your movement everywhere you are at any point in time. Now, we don't believe anything bad is being done with that file. In fact, it turns out the file just remains on the device. But you have to recognize that, in fact, this kind of monitoring and this granular level of privacy is being impacted in everything that you do. Remember WikiLeaks? This is still a story that has to play out. This is an organization that is sharing very often confidential information that belongs to local, state, federal, and international organizations. And it's to keep government representatives accountable. At least that's what they would like to maintain. Very interesting to see the results of that. But the big thing that happened, like the others weren't big, right? The big thing was social media. Social media happened after 9/11. Really, it came to, at least it came to have a label, and it became to be a big part of all of our lives. And it seems like it's been around a long time, right? We talk about Facebook and YouTube like, I've always known it. The oldest person in this list here is 6 or 7 years old, which is Facebook. That's remarkable if you think about the amount of adoption and use we have it. And what we've decided to do is we've decided to share our lives with the rest of the world. We've made that decision to be sharing privacy and parts of our lives. One part of the Facebook privacy argument that I think you will resonate with you is this notion of a product they had called Beacon. They released it in 2007, and what it was a relationship between Facebook and a number of partners. In this case, they had up to 45 big partners, other websites that would, dependent on your behaviors on those websites, send back information into your news stream on Facebook. So your behaviors, unbeknownst to you, was being shared with all your friends and family and everybody else out there. I don't know if this is true or folklore, but there's that case of the person who was searching for an engagement ring for their girlfriend, and she, of course, saw that in the news stream, and it spoiled the whole surprise. Right? The backlash on this was significant. People didn't know it was happening. That's the first part. But when they did and they learned more about it, they hated it more. And finally, in 2009, Facebook shut it down. I wouldn't be surprised if it comes back. This needs little explanation. Don't use social media for really private things because you will be exposed. The other thing that happened in the last 10 years was Google Maps. Right? Google decided to photograph every single street in America. Talk about ambition. That's an incredible thing. They did it, by the way. Every street, you can look at your house. If you go to Google Maps, you've probably all done it. It's almost. There's a few private areas in the country that we've grayed out. In this case, you'll see this is a street in New York, I believe, and these individuals are grayed out for privacy reasons. But privacy is very cultural, too, when it comes to the web. In the US, we've, for the most part, been cool with this, but other countries haven't been so cool in it. In Australia, due to concerns from citizens, it was shut down for a while and went under review, and then it recently started up again. Same thing in India. In India, there was an uproar, slowed down. Right now, that case is still pending, or the investigation. So Google Maps in India could be or is still it could have been resolved recently, or it's still pending. However, in Germany, not so much. They shut it down. Germans didn't like this. Germans didn't think Google Maps was consistent with their privacy culture. So what I've been sharing with you is a lot of the bad things. Clearly, this presentation shouldn't leave you with the message that privacy is bad, and so because it's bad and it happens, let's just be okay with it. I really want to leave you with a number of messages. I definitely want to tell you that these things are bad, and we need to be protected when there are breaches and then when there's things we don't like. But let's talk about things that we don't control that may be good, right? So I went to a site called Spokeo, right? And I encourage you, everybody after this, if you haven't been to it, if you want to be enlightened and perhaps alarmed, go to spokeo.com and check out what information you can find on yourself or people you know. Right, so I go to this site the other day as part of this research, and I check out, I put in my own name, of course, and there is a lot of stuff about me. The information, by the way, is public domain. So it's not stuff that isn't freely available. What it does is it aggregates it, brings it together in one place. And perhaps that's what's so enlightening about it, is it shows me all the stuff that's public domain in America about me. Things like my address, phone number, how much I potentially earn, my horoscope. That's one that spooked me out a lot. Yeah. That's the kind of public domain information that when you overlay it with something like Google Maps, you can tell very interesting information about where you live, how much your house costs, how much is the price of your neighbor's house, if you're curious, or you're moving to a place and you want to get a sense of the particular prices in that neighborhood. So it's useful public information. I've learned a lot about myself, again, by looking at what gets recommended to me. Now, this is recommended to me because I shared something with the web, with the internet. It didn't happen arbitrarily. I actually chose to buy my books online, in which case telling the online service, these are the books I like, this is the type of book I buy, and so I've given something away. In return, I get this. I get to learn about myself. You know, look at this and say, oh, that's interesting. It tells me a little bit about who I am and what my interests are. This is another site that I like a lot, OpenTable. So in OpenTable, let's see what I give away. What part of me, what part of my private life do I give away? Well, I tell the service what I like to eat, right, by doing this. I tell the service where I live, tell the service how often I go out to eat, how much I'm prepared to pay. All of a sudden, I'm telling it a lot. However, when I come back, it tells me, because you like this food, because you live in this place, these are restaurants you might want to go to. And I think that's significantly useful. So I've given something away, and I've got something in return. When I go to the web and I check the weather, I don't care what the weather is necessarily in a place I don't live in and have no interest in. I want to know the weather in the place I'm at. Right? To get to this, I had to give away something. I had to give away where I live, my zip code in this case. So I gave away something, got something in return. Last night I stayed at the Hyatt Regency just across the street, and the information to make that decision came from other people sharing something about their lives. Right? It came about because they decided, perhaps by name or anonymous, they were going to share something about their visit. And in aggregate, it's quite useful. But think about it. People are sharing an awful lot about themselves. And, you know, of the services that are very useful, we've tried to solve the problem about a universal login for a long time. Right? I don't know how many of you have login names and passwords for multiple sites. You probably have hundreds, right? Well, Facebook, because you share so much and because you use it as a ubiquitous tool, gives us this service, this ability to potentially have a universal login. And one could argue, well, I get to a site that has no relationship to Facebook, and yet it knows that I'm there and it's who I am. You could say, well, potentially that's useful, because now I don't have to log in. And in this example, I can use comments to comment on the site. What you're seeing here are instances of where people search for the word flu. And you'll see the two date lines. This year, apparently, we're doing good. The thesis is that if a lot of people in a certain area are searching for the word flu, there must be a higher incidence of flu in that particular area, right? And so that's the thesis. The question is, does it actually play out? Now, we have this information, but it's usually historical, right? The CDC knows after a flu outbreak where it happened. But wouldn't it be useful to know when it's happening? Well, it turns out if you look at the stats over the last few years, the incidence of searching for flu in particular areas maps identically to the historical trends of the flu. Very, very useful. But remember, to get to here, people had to share something about themselves. They had to share a search term of the fact that they had the flu. And the search engine, of course, knows where you are. So even though we're giving away all this stuff, we're also providing feedback to the services. So we're saying to Facebook, you know what? I'd like to give away information, but I didn't know how many people were seeing that. I want more tools. I want more control over that privacy. And you're seeing that reflected in changes in these products. And there's some peer pressure, too. You know, those of you who are using Google Plus will know that it allows you to send information just to circles of friends, right? Groups of friends. And that's what they're purporting as a competitive advantage against other social networks. So that's a lot of information. I want you to think about what I've just presented. There's different classes of privacy, right? There's privacy that's really, really bad. And that march is because of we want to know more, federal and local government and law enforcement people need to know more stuff to combat against terrorism and other types of crime. Then there's stuff that bad people do. There's breaches, right? Then the second category is around information that's just out there. The train has left the station. Your public domain information is right out there and you can't actually control it. And then the third category is the fact that we're all choosing to share a huge amount of information, right? So it leads me to state very categorically that we can no longer view privacy through this narrow lens of binary, good or bad. Privacy, no privacy is bad, all privacy is good. You can no longer do that. So I came up with a really innovative formula here that you can take away with you. You can put your money on this one. If you take that public information, you add it to the information we're prepared to share anyway because we get that net value back, and you put it together with some innovative technology, my argument is that you get a more valuable web. And I'm just starting the conversation. So if you like this topic and find it stimulating or provocative, I'd love to engage further with you. So thank you very much.